The European Championship is a monster of a competition, second only to the World Cup and Champions League. Every 4 years, 24 nations come together to decide who will become the best in Europe. Billions watch, millions cram into the stadia, but it wasn't always this way. In today's film, we remember the forgotten Euros, when it was a 2-bit operation featuring 4 teams across a long weekend. This is the humble beginnings of the European Championships. The 1950s, tumultuous for Europe, great for European football. It gave us UEFA, the European Cup, and finally the idea of a European Championship, thanks to 2 Frenchmen. One being French newspaper L'Equipe's editor Gabriel Hanot, the other Henri Delaunay, the head of the newly found UEFA. Delaunay had form for creating tournaments that would become empires. In 1928, he helped put forward the motion for a World Championship, and 2 years later, it became a reality. Preliminary talks for what would become the Euros had taken place before UEFA was even a thing. The problem with football competitions, they needed governing bodies to run. Former Austrian coach Hugo Meisel found that out when he tried to set up a continental competition in the 20s. UEFA only became a thing on June the 15th, 1954 in Basel, Switzerland. Only then did the Euros become a possibility. The wheels were in motion when Henri Delaunay penned an essay entitled, "Is it possible to build a football in Europe?" On September the 28th, 1958, the first qualifier in the competition, known as the European Nations Cup, took place. Delaunay wasn't knocking about to witness it, unfortunately, as he had passed away 3 years prior. His death only helped speed up the process of forming the championships we call today the European Championships. Finally, at the umpteenth vote in front of a UEFA Congress in Copenhagen, Henri's son, the equally French-sounding Pierre, passed the vote through. Henri Delaunay's death was the raindrops, his son's persistence was the stream, before finally, UEFA President Ebbe Schwartz's announcement was the dam bursting all over Europe. We finally had our European Championship. There was just one problem, however. And that problem was that not many countries were asked. UEFA needed 16 countries to make the thing happen, ahead of a 4-team final tournament. That was the deal, and it wasn't even close to being sealed. Nobody wanted a slice of the pie. UEFA extended the deadline for registering countries, and only a forceful UEFA sprung the filling of their quota. They even had one more than the bare minimum. Here's a list of some of the more prominent countries sitting on their hands throughout the entire process. West Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and of course completing the pack, the aggressively insular England. It all started in front of over 100,000 people in Moscow, still one of the biggest crowds in the competition's history, when the Soviet Union beat a Hungarian side stricken by the revolution of 2 years prior. The appetite was obvious amongst Europe. Adding to Moscow, there were over 60,000 flocking to games in Hungary, Poland, Romania, and in Madrid. Qualification eventually boiled down to the quarter-finals, after the elimination of Ireland in the preliminaries, as well as the aforementioned Hungary and Greece, Turkey, Norway, Bulgaria, Poland, and Denmark. So far, so good. The fact that only 3 quarter-finals would be played hints that that particular trend would cease soon enough. So, as France, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia routinely booked themselves in for the main tournament to be played in France, the 4th tie was a non-starter, and football was the furthest thing from anybody's minds. UEFA's warm balls must have malfunctioned when 2 dictatorships on opposite ends of the spectrum and continent were pulled out to meet one another. In the end, General Franco was just too spooked by the thought that his Spain could be inferior to the Soviets, so he pulled his nation out of the tournament. The Soviet tanks of Lev Yashin, Valentin Ivanov and Valentin Bubakin were free to roll into Marseille into the summer of 1960, where Ivanov scored twice in a rout of the Czechs. Barely lifting a finger to make the final, they converged on the capital, meeting a surprise opponent when they rocks up. France were supposed to be the ones decked out in blue, or bleu, in the Parc des Princes. They were rampant in front of goal, offsetting their defensive vulnerabilities, and really ought to have been in the final. A few problems though. Just Fontaine had broken his leg, Roger Biantoni's knee was reduced to a sloppy lasagna, and Raymond Kopa was also absent. They had made just the semi-final of the World Cup for the first time ever, yet there were just 3 survivors from those rose-tinted Scandinavian times. Yugoslavia, their opponents, weren't without their problems. They spent 28 sweat-soaked hours on a train to Paris, only to realise they hadn't got transport to their hotel and walked an equally sweaty kilometre to their digs with their mountains of luggage. Revived by the revelry in the Moulin Rouge, Milan Galic would go down in history as the first man to score in the European Championship, bagging inside 11 minutes. The hosts roared back 4-2 ahead with little over a quarter of an hour remaining, but their crumbly cheesecake of a defence revealed itself. 3 goals in 4 minutes later, France were out, Yugoslavia were in, and a nation were left stunned. France wouldn't qualify for another European Championship until the 90s. The French public wanted the hosts, they wanted Western European glamour. Instead, they received 2 pieces of Eastern European gold mucked by their own perspectives. Yugoslavia had to cope with a last-minute goalkeeping change when Blažo Vedinic was subbed in. It appeared to make little difference. Milan Galic banged in another goal to take the lead at a sodden Paris. A sodden Paris that needed a little bit of ingenuity to slog through. Cobblers, you might say. Paris is warm, is beautiful, and is no slog. Speaking of cobblers, Boris Kuznetsov was a cobbler on the side and equipped the team for the second half with spikier boots on a pitch that was increasingly marsh-like. The difference maker, when Slava Mitrovica equalised within 4 minutes and Victor Ponedeljc added the winner in extra time. UEFA made the dizzying profits of 24,000 francs. Only 78,958 people bothered to show for the 4 matches, and the European Championships was off to an inauspicious start. Them green shoots of recovery revealed themselves after the World Cup in Chile, when the registration leapt from 17 to 29 and even included England, who got out from under their comfort blanket called the gatekeepers of football, and also joined newcomers Italy. Scotland, however, who had thumped Spain 6-2 in the Bernabeu in June 1963, hadn't bothered to sign up. A team that were brimming with talent that could have genuinely staked a claim at the competition, since of course a group stage wasn't involved. Speaking of Spain, they actually fulfilled their obligations this time throughout qualification, slinking past Romania and both Irelands, comprehensive, if you take out the fact that they were almost dispatched by Northern Ireland in the last 16. A team that didn't bother this time were Greece, who quickly backtracked on their participation when UEFA plucked Albania out of the hat. So it was Albania in the last 16, a landmark in one of the more remarkable qualification campaigns. This by a Denmark team still amateur and still without their best players thanks to their FA's archaic rules. Yet UEFA did them a solid, placing them against Malta, whom even they could stick 9 past, and Albania, who caused them a few more problems before Luxembourg were the opponents standing in their way. Luxembourg, who took Denmark to a 3rd game in neutral Rotterdam. For Luxembourg, it wasn't a happy reunion with the Netherlands after their shocking elimination of the Dutch. Denmark were through by the seat of their pants. Luxembourg wouldn't win under the umbrella of the Euros for a generation or two, and the Dutch typically took to moaning in the column inches. Meanwhile, at the final qualifying stage, France showed themselves up again, losing to a resurgent Hungary side led by Florian Albert, whilst the Soviet Union a case for their defence in a victory over a challenging Sweden side. Despite half the field being Eastern, UEFA plumped for another Western host yet again, and Spain got the nod. Under the management of Jose Villallonga, Spain's task was to recover from the traumatic 1962 World Cup, where their only points came from a last-gasp win over Mexico in a disastrous campaign. Villalonga's plan was to branch out from the usual haunts of Madrid and Barcelona to source his talent. Naturally though, he would rely on talent such as Luis Suarez, not that one, Jus Pereda and Amancio, all dipped in the Clásico ink. Still, he did youthen up the squad. Perhaps that's why they struggled against Hungary at the Bernabeu in the semi-finals. Or maybe it was the fact that Juventus refused to let Luis del Sol participate, or because Paco Gento was made persona non grata by the manager. Despite their absentees, Hungary forced extra time, but the quality told when Amancio netted the winner deep into the June night in Madrid. A smoother ride was made of yet another semi-final by the Soviets later that evening in the Camp Nou. You can thank the Denmark FA, the DBU, for this one. How dare Erik Laika, Sorensen, Kai Johansson and Harold Nielsen turn professional? They were banished as a result, whilst Jens Petersen missed the semi-final of the European Championship because he was sitting an exam. Imagine Kobbie Mainoo not pitching up for a knockout game this summer because he's got his A-level in psychology at the same time. So the professionals and whole Soviet Union made predictably easy work of the Danes and were energised for what remains the largest attendance at a European Championship tournament match. The Bernabeu, 79,115 souls cramming into what ought to have been a rematch of the 1960 quarter-final between Spain and the Soviet Union. Two political ideologies smashing together in an age of continued dictatorship, and this time, Franco couldn't withdraw his team. What followed was the finest start to any European Championship final when the two sides traded goals in the first 10 minutes. The tainting of the final for a ludicrous decision to not award Soviet Union a penalty on Igor Chislenko would get lost to the sands of time, when Marcelino bulleted a header in with 6 minutes remaining. The Soviet players received the kind of reception from both the Kremlin and the public upon their return, as you'd expect. For UEFA, it was similar reading. The tournament didn't live down to the lowly expectations of 1960, even if the attendances and profits were up. For Spain, they demanded a golden age. They'd waited 44 years for a sequel to the heroics of the Antwerp Olympics. Little did they know they'd have to wait another 44 years for another taste of success. The 60s were dying. UEFA had hardly struck gold with their international competition, so did some spring cleaning in time for the 70s to peek its head around the corner. European Nations Cup no more, now it was the European Championship. Gone were the straight knockouts of qualifying, and into the groups determined 8 winners who'd play off for the 4 final berths. The main story of qualification was reserved for one of its final matches, when the likes of holders Spain, Bulgaria, Soviet Union, Hungary and France had all sealed their playoff place. Debutants West Germany were all set to follow them. They set about the Albanian capital of Tirana with a stench of superiority, only to stink the place up. Helmut Schön, a World Cup finalist coach, was without star players, but it shouldn't have mattered. On a pitch that some described as a potato field, West Germany were blighted and toothless, 0-0 the scoreline when any form of a victory would have propelled them past Yugoslavia and into the next phase. Yugoslavia were joined by France, who confirmed their place the following week, before the 8th and final spot was reserved for the British. UEFA conveniently lumped in 2 editions of the British Home Championships as a qualifying group, ensuring that England and Scotland were placed into somewhat a group of death. Scotland famously became champions of the world in April 1967 when they dismantled England at Wembley. Whilst it wouldn't be another decade before Scottish fans dismantled the Wembley goalpost quite literally, England dismantled Scotland's European Championship dreams in a 1-1 draw at Hampden in front of a competition record attendance of over 134,000 people. In the playoffs, France once again wimped out to Yugoslavia. Italy were given a fright by Bulgaria. The Soviet Union were made to work for their place at a 3rd Euros with a second leg overturning of Hungary in Moscow. and England won their spot at the Bernabeu against the holders. The teams were dispatched to another Western European nation when the cities of Naples, Florence and Rome hosted the tournament. The hosts were up first and they couldn't be split as Italy continued their wretched goal-scoring form against the Soviet Union by deciding not to bother finding the net in Naples. Now this was 1968, there's no penalty shootout ratified by UEFA and there's 3 days until the final in Rome. There couldn't be a replay that could adhere to any kind of fair competition, so after 120 minutes, the first semi-final was decided in the referee's dressing room. 4 men won £1 coin and out they all emerged after a moment of tension. The Italian beaming, the Soviet depressed and the hosts were penciled in for the final. The eyes of Europe quickly diverted north to Florence to the world champions England and the Brazil of Europe, Yugoslavia. There was bound to be just one winner. England had the players and momentum. Yugoslavia had their hearts ripped out when a handful of their key players, including 1960 hero Milan Galic and Velibor Vasovic, had the temerity to pursue a career outside of their homeland. With their international careers ended in an instant, Yugoslavia had to find a new hero. They found one and he went by the name of Dragan Zajic. Match winner, just 21 years of age, the diamond in what was a rough game of football between two sides enveloped on the idea of committing grievous bodily harm. Somehow only Alan Mullery saw red and England's Euros campaign saw the red of the traffic lights. Almost 4 hours of football had generated just one goal, fitting as it was held in Italy in the times of the Catenaccio. Thankfully we got a bonus game due to Italy's inability to kill off another team. 2 more hours of Italian tentative football only saved by Angelo Dominguini's last gasp equaliser against Yugoslavia. Thankfully there wasn't a need for a coin toss as this match could feasibly go on forever and a replay was scheduled for 2 days later. Fortunately Italy found no need for the break glass in case of emergency two-headed coin and Yugoslavia finally caved in. Their young team was made younger by injury to experienced players and Italy played the long game. Luckily, before the Azzurri could play the long game and grind out replay after replay until Yugoslavia were demolished, Gigi Riva and Pietro Anastasi grabbed the goals that made Italy champions of Europe. The Euros of diminishing returns. We'd had an entertaining if sparsely attended first championship before dwindling success of travelling teams for the remainder of the 60s. The next decade though would prove more fruitful. Fruitful and colourful since the transition from monochrome had already been well established after the beautiful televisual experience of the 1970 World Cup in Mexico. The European Championships followed suit and UEFA even bent at the knee to allow substitutions for the very first time. West Germany rid themselves of their Albanian embarrassment to progress through the groups and would be joined by Romania, who surprisingly ousted Czechoslovakia, Hungary, who pipped France to the punch, an England team clinging on to relevancy, and Italy in their pomp, while Scotland and the Netherlands would be found out by Belgium and Yugoslavia to everyone's surprise. Oh, and General Franco lived long enough to see his nation beaten by the Soviet Union as Spain crashed out of qualifying at the first hurdle. He died 4 years later, presumably from his hubris and shame. Belgium bounced back from their flimsy preparations at what was a desperate World Cup from their point of view, to upset a team that reached the final back in Mexico. Wilfred van Moor and Paul van Himst grabbed the goals that dumped Italy out of the tournament, and it earned Belgium the hosting rights as UEFA yet again plonked the competition into the heartlands of Western Europe. Hungary and Romania traversed the distance of 3 matches to settle who the underdog of the championships would be, whilst the Soviet Union brute forced their way beyond a decent Yugoslavian outfit, before the most famous match of Euro 72, and that counts the main tournament as well. The European Championships may well have been staged across 5 June days in Antwerp, Brussels and Liège, but it was won in London on April the 29th in front of 96,766 fans at Wembley when West Germany delivered one of the most complete matches of international football. L'Equipe claimed it was football from the year 2000 as Uli Hoeneß, Gunter Netzer and Gerd Müller all found the net against a decrepit England. In a 3-game series that spanned 3 tournaments, West Germany had won the rubber match, as the completion of Franz Beckenbauer from midfield to libero was sealed and Europe had its prominent team for the next decade confirmed. Outside of Beckenbauer, Müller and Hoeneß, Gunter Netzer dazzled like never before, or sadly since, whilst Paul Breitner barraged through the ranks, Sepp Maier kept goal expertly, and the likes of Bertie Vogts and Jurgen Grabowski kept things ticking along. West Germany was supposed to be in the doldrums. Bayern Munich, who made up much of the core, had been defeated by Rangers in the Cup Winners' Cup final, and they had only just scraped another Bundesliga amidst horrific form. Unbelievably, a potential final opponent in Soviet Union offered themselves up for a warm-up friendly in Munich. When they were soundly thrashed 4-1, there was only going to be one name on the Henri Delaunay trophy. Whilst the Soviets had more than enough to bundle Hungary out of another Euros with barely an effort, nobody seemed to care. You'd get more people these days at a meaningless end-of-season Halifax Town vs Altrincham game than you did at the Euro 72 semi-final, as little over 1,600 people flocked to Brussels to witness it. That is because, simultaneously, Antwerp played host to Belgium's semi-final with the favourites West Germany. Belgium could have given themselves a slender chance by staging the semi-final in somewhere maybe French-speaking, like Brussels. Staging Antwerp, part of Flanders, which is a region largely Dutch, there was more than a whiff of West German sentiment as Gerd Müller swept in 2 goals to defeat the hosts. God only knows what the result would have been if the sides met in the largely German-speaking Liège. Either way, Belgium didn't have the quality for this level. Would the Soviets' 3 Euros finals out of 4 count for anything by way of experience? What do you think? They got slapped. 2 more from Gerd Müller with a Haki Wimmer strike sandwiched in between. Probably the most comprehensive European Championship title triumph ever. The continent bowed at their feet. La Libre Belgique noted they were the successors to the Austrian Wunder team of the 30s, completely bypassing the magical Magyars. Meanwhile, back home they were described as Jahrhundertelf, which translates to Team of the Century. If a tournament could be one-sided, this was it. UEFA received a little shot in the arm from the competition, even if it didn't return to the entertaining heights of 1960. What followed in Europe's first ever championships held in the East would change the tournament forever. Not only were West Germany champions of Europe, they'd followed that up by being crowned the world champions. In this respect, they had no equals. From a football perspective, they perhaps had one, Netherlands, but they were a nation who had been vanquished by the West Germans in that World Cup final, and a nation who had yet to appear at the European Championships. However, this was a West Germany without the now retired Gerd Müller and without the ostracised pair of Paul Breitner and Gunter Netzer after they had jumped ship to Real Madrid without the decency of consulting the DFB in advance. With Real not particularly keen or under pressure to give up Netzer for international matches, Helmut Schön was forced to part with Netzer as an idea for the national team. A shame since Netzer's heyday had been with West Germany at the prior Euros. Still, most of your heroes from 72 and 74 remained, and they had made the playoffs after not really needing to be all that imperious against a slew of Greece, Bulgaria and Malta in qualification. Meanwhile, Belgium and the Soviet Union hardly needed to impress to reach the playoffs either, nor did Spain against a draw-heavy Romania. Meanwhile, England's travails after Sir Alf Ramsey continued when they were dispatched by Czechoslovakia, and what's worse, Wales had gotten further when they won 5 out of 6 against the likes of Hungary, Austria and even Luxembourg. Making up the hex of teams were Yugoslavia, as well as the Dutch, who had to escape one of the more hellacious groups in qualification history. Drawn with Poland, semi-finalists of the 1974 World Cup, and Italy, recent finalists of both the World Cup and Euros, even a squad with the might of total football and Johan Cruyff had a job on to secure qualification. Poland demolished the Dutch in September 1975 but could not follow that up. Not in Amsterdam a month later in the reverse, nor in their final qualifier in Warsaw against Italy. Defeating the Azzurri would have heaped the pressure onto the Dutch ahead of a final trip to Rome, but instead they were free to put their feet up safe in the knowledge of a playoff berth. They'd battered their nearest and dearest Belgium in the playoffs, making a victim of Raymond Goethals as Belgian coach between legs. They'd done it, they'd reached their first ever Euros, but things weren't too cracking in the Dutch camp. Rinus Michels had been replaced by George Noble, a man who had been previously sacked by Ajax in 1974, and the divide between Amsterdam and the rest of the country's talent threatened to eat up the entire team. To the point where Johan Cruyff, Johan Neeskens and Wim van Hanegem issued an ultimatum to Noble that it was either they, three of the nation's star players, or the PSV duo of Willy van der Kuilen and Jan van Beveren. Noble predictably sided with the Stars despite them kicking up the fuss. Joining the Dutch at the tournament was typically West Germany after getting Spain back to Munich where they could beat them. Surprisingly, however, the Soviet Union would not be joining them. This despite sacking Konstantin Beskov in place of Dynamo Kiev coach Valery Lobanovsky. He had led Dynamo to the Cup Winners' Cup in 1975 but couldn't lead the Dynamo heavy Soviets to the Euros, quashed by Czechoslovakia. 3 Josef Moder goals and 1 from little-known Antonin Panenka sealed it, and Lobanovsky's plans to breed familiarity in the national team wouldn't be felt until the 80s in a future spell after he was sacked. The Soviets wouldn't be in a Euros until Lobanovsky returned. The fairy tale of the quarter-finals was quickly quashed by Yugoslavia, even without the injured Dragan Zajic, as they rattled off a 2-0 win in Zagreb over Wales and quickly found an away goal at Ninian Park to complete the quartet. With another split of 2 Western teams to 2 Eastern outfits, UEFA finally staged the tournament behind the Iron Curtain and the cities of Zagreb and Belgrade. The divide could be summed up by the Dutch winger René van der Kerkhoff, who remarked that the Netherlands' attitude to the Czechoslovaks were, "Who the hell are they?" The Czechs, or rather Slovaks since the majority of the squad were Slovakian, hadn't been named Team of the Year by France Football the prior December without good reason. The great Don Revie, even with scouting dossiers and Bibles aplenty, was disarmed by them in qualification. They had momentum and compared to their semi-final opponents, Netherlands probably had the greater morale. Breaking news on the morning of June the 16th, 1976 came of George Noble's resignation being rejected by the KNVB chairman. Noble, already proven with his failed stint at Ajax, couldn't hold together the players at his disposal, particularly with the fresh problem of a divide between Amsterdam and the provinces. His resignation would be quickly accepted after the tournament. Whilst the Dutch remained bullish in their idea that it was their right to be named European champions in '76, Czechoslovakia treated them with the disdain they deserved for overlooking them. 17 unbeaten Czechoslovakian Anton Ondruš found the net not once but twice. Unfortunately, with the second, he put the ball beyond his own goalkeeper, sending the game into extra time. It had descended into farce before the extra 30 minutes as the nations traded red cards before a third dismissal, this time for Willy van Hanegem, opening the game up. Van Hanegem carded for disagreeing with the decision to award Czechoslovakia a second goal on 114 minutes after he believed Johan Cruyff was fouled in the build-up. He only contributed to his team's downfall. With one more player on the pitch and coping better with the treacherous Zagreb conditions, Czechoslovakia found the kill through František Vesely 2 minutes from time. Following night, eyes were trained on Belgrade for the clash between hosts and reigning champions of both Europe and the world. Yet the first half didn't side with the silverware but with home comforts, as Danilo Popivoda and Dragan Zajic found the net. A good game only got better when the West Germans acclimatised to their surroundings and provided a semblance of a fight. Still, when Dieter Muller was introduced on 79 minutes, the game was still slipping away from them, with a scoreline in Yugoslavia's favour. Dieter Müller, a man who shared a legend's name but far from his legacy, was stepping not only into the European Championships for the first time, but stepping into international football as a whole for the first time. It took him 3 minutes to find the net and 40 minutes to find a hat-trick. International football is unlikely to see a better debut, and West Germany was saved by the skin of their teeth by the 22-year-old FC Köln forward. I've not mentioned a third place playoff in this video for good reason, and that's because the bollocks. I will pay a few sentences towards the concept here, however, since 1976 continued the trend of insanely good football with the all too rare beast of a good, meaningless game of tournament football. Like the previous two encounters, it went the distance, was laden with goals, and this time the Netherlands came away with a medal. Figuratively, of course, as they snatched bronze from the host thanks to Ruud Gayle's extra time winner in a match that neither Neeskens or Cruyff could be bothered to turn out for. The same vein continued for the final, which is so rare even for the greatest of international tournaments when the stakes are so high and creep up to meet the nerves of players and supporters at the same level. Yet again, West Germany fell 2 goals behind in quick-fire fashion, only to be dredged back up by their lapels by a man named Müller. Graduating quite rightly from the substitutions bench to the starting 11, Dieter Müller grabbed his 4th goal of the championship, emulating Gerd's record from '72. Whilst Gerd Müller had done so at the peak of his powers, Dieter was scoring his 4th goal in his 80th minute of international football. Drama would not be consigned to 90 minutes, as this tournament should have spelled out from its first 3 games. The holders were handed an almighty lifeline when Hans-Georg Schwarzenbeck cleared off the line and Bernd Holzenbein completed the double punch with a late leveller. 30 minutes of impenetrable football later, football would have a first. A major international competition settled by the matter of penalties. A measure introduced to stop coin tosses and the drawing of lots. UEFA probably didn't think they'd have to reach into their bag of tricks for the shootout this early. It was penalties. It was Germany. There surely was only one winner. As such, Czechoslovakian goalkeeper Ivor Victor didn't get near any of the penalty kicks, as the first 3 were slammed into the net. Thankfully for Victor, the 4th from Uli Hoeneß was slammed into the inky Belgrade night. 4-3 up, the European Championships boiled down to 2 men. Sepp Maier stood on his line with all the experience and pride of a decade as the number 1 of his country and his country's finest club. Opposite, some 12 yards away, some pudgy Slovakian midfielder that people knew very little of outside of his homeland, Antonin Panenka. And you know the rest. The one diversion in German history when it comes to the penalty shootout, and it needed something special. Something that would reverberate throughout the history of football and of sport. It needed innovation, and Panenka, a master of the dead ball, provided it. The delicate central chip instantly immortalised. Often repeated, it will never be duplicated for its sheer audacity in a championship-winning kick of such enormous magnitude. The first 5 European Championships totaled 20 matches and generated 5 separate winners. What it took UEFA 16 years to establish in terms of matches will be overseen in the first week of this year's competition in Germany. As the 1980s came into focus, UEFA made its first steps in expanding the championships. No longer would it be consigned to just a mucky weekend away in a few cities in a sole country. The field would be doubled in 4 years' time, and it nearly killed the European Championships. To find out why, stick around for tomorrow's film, The Nearly Murdered Euros.